we're making a list. All right, we'll call the Plan Commission to order. It is Wednesday, March 11th. It's 6:30. We have a quorum, and the agenda was properly posted. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 4 is public appearances, public's opportunity to speak on any subject that is not a specific agenda item. This one is a specific agenda item, so we'll move on from there. Item 5 is discuss and consider the meeting minutes from the Plan Commission on February 12th.
Motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Having heard it, all those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Item 6 is discuss and consider a request from Miracle League of Dane County for the approval of a site plan for the ADA accessible baseball field in Bakken Park.
Hello everyone, my name is Andy Meesman. I'm a landscape architect with Snyder and Associates. Together we're helping the Miracle League Field of Dane County put together a set of plans for a Miracle Field here at Bakken Park. Some of you might be familiar with the project. We're working on developing these plans for approval and construction. Right now the Miracle League is in their fundraising efforts, and we're gathering all that information right now, but producing the construction drawings to move forward with the plan and get all that stuff squared away for square footages and estimates. I just wanted to walk you through really quick what the field what it looks like, the way it's oriented, and just a few perspectives of what the field will look like here in the future. First of all, we've considered kind of three main ideas around our design, how you would approach this field. So we've oriented it at the northern side of the site right here to create a little bit of an experience as the users enter the site with a plaza space that's dedicated for gathering of families and players before they enter the field. Also, we considered just the shortest distance we could for ADA compliancy and getting users to the field. A lot of the kids and older adults that will be using the field are disabled, so getting the shortest distance from the ADA compliant stalls here to right here was your most direct path to the field. Also, we felt this orientation kind of celebrated the area a little bit more, and we didn't tuck it behind the existing playground here, which is going to stay, so it's going to be a little bit more visible for everyone entering the site. Also, we wanted to orient it this way, keeping this plaza space off the main circulation route of this path that's going down this way, and with future expansions out to the southwest here. So there's a little bit more room, breathing room up here as kids and families spill out of the field. They're not going to be interfering with anyone else using this trail in the park. There won't be any conflicts like that. So just show you a couple quick graphics here of what it looks like in perspective. That plaza space on the entry right here, two covered dugouts, pretty simple backdrop, a backstop here for the field. It's 125 feet from home plate to center field, so it's not your typical dimensions that you're going to see on a high school baseball or softball field. This material in here is a poured-in-place surfacing, so it's really compact and dense, so you can get a wheelchair out there. There's no trip hazards. All the bases are integral to the field. They're basically painted on there. Everything's flush. Just another perspective of what that entry experience looks like as you approach the field here. And that's about all we have right now. If there's any questions or anyone needs to see any additional plans, we have that ready. So,
Is this leveraging other Miracle League fields, what they've learned from putting them in?
Absolutely. I mean, Snyder and Associates, we've developed plans and designs for, I think, 3 fields in the Des Moines metropolitan area. We've also done a lot of all-inclusive playgrounds, which carry over the same components, so we've learned quite a bit from those experiences. Also, Bill Schultz and Greg Sweeney with the Miracle Field, Miracle League are obviously pretty dedicated to this project, and they're taking all their knowledge and letting us know about that and sharing resources here. So I think the Miracle League has about, is it over 200 fields throughout the country? So there's pretty extensive knowledge and design on how this all comes together.
Good. Other questions?
You mentioned the size of the field, just for my perspective, because I'm not totally familiar with it. So, like, there's the major league size, and I know there's different sizes for little leagues or whatever. So, how does that compare that you can relate it to? Is it bigger? Is it
So a major
smaller?
league, it's quite a bit smaller.
Okay.
Major league field is going to be about at 300 feet. So imagine this doubled.
Okay, good. Okay.
And typically speaking, the kids and adults that are playing on this field aren't going to be hitting home runs over the fence. So that 125 foot provides a good reference that scale that feels good to them, and it's a little bit more approachable for them to get out on the field and make it
It's smaller than the Little League.
smaller than a little league field. So
About almost half the size of the Little League.
Aaron, you had a memo in the packet as well.
Yeah, just a couple of, I think fairly minor comments. This would be characterized as an active public outdoor recreation facility per our zoning ordinance, which does trigger some buffering requirements from adjacent residential properties. The residential properties are 600 feet away, but they are technically adjacent to the field, and I think the one to the south does have a sight line, and I think you've done a great job landscaping. Most of it, there aren't really trees blocking that view, so I think we would just like to see a few more of the canopy trees, maybe just inside the path down in that area there.
Yep.
The other thought I had, it made us take some trial and error through the first couple of games, but we do have ADA spots in the parking lot. And it's probably enough for everyday use, but with this use, it may not be enough. So I don't know if we need just kind of a open unloading area on game days or something like that. But I think it's something, you guys and Sean can kind of work out and see what the best solution is.
yeah, I also did some just background research on that and a quick case study of several different Miracle Fields, and that number varies greatly from 6 to a site like this all the way up to 20. So I don't think there are any hard numbers to apply to that, but that's something we'll definitely consider. And that parking lot's fairly large, so there's room to expand and accommodate any additional
Temporarily
stalls.
sign somewhere.
Yep.
Okay. Kevin?
Yeah, I just had some, I guess, more utility type comments, and I think most of them are pretty basic. Storm sewer ones, just some more details that kind of are needed, and I think we can just work with Schneider on those. I don't see anything that's any kind of a deal breaker. I think it'll work. It's just some details that noted on the plans. I guess the one is noting that the water main, so we've got the water main that's extended and planned to be dead-ended past the splash pad. And
It's right
yeah,
here.
somewhere in there, and that should be, now that the field's swapped, extended past this field at this time as well. To obviously, the plan was to loop it eventually over as well, so and obviously to save digging it up later or anything like that, it should be done at this time as well. So, but nothing that I didn't think we could just work with you guys on the storm sewer stuff.
Absolutely. There's also probably efforts we could combine here in terms of construction access and how that works, and with the splash pad and timing and both those features going in.
No lights.
There will be lights on the field. Right now we have planned for 4 lights, one right here, one right there, one right here, and another one right there.
Okay.
How late do the games typically run?
Where do you have a good answer? Typical,
What was it, but,
how late do the games typically run?
we probably have 2 games, 5:30, 7 o'clock. And as we get later in August, we may need the lights. I was at the Milwaukee field. They have those 2 sets of lights like we put in there. They've hardly ever used them. If we ever go away from daylight savings, we probably need
other questions, Commission?
Motion to approve the request from Miracle League of Dane County for approval of a site plan and ADA accessible baseball field in Bachman Park
Is there a
Second.
Okay, there's a second.
That was staff condition.
with staff conditions, yes.
Yep.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Then we move on to item 7, is discuss and consider a request from Johnson Health Tech for the approval of a site plan amendment to provide additional parking spaces to existing parking lot located at 1600 Landmark in the Commerce Park.
Good evening, I'm Gary Blazek with Veerbecker and Todd Fossum from Johnson Health Tech. What they're looking for is to gain some additional parking stalls in their existing facility. We submitted a plan. I'll give you a quick overview here of it. They're trying to pick up about 40 stalls, which they need. The main parking, the big parking lot on the north side, they'll pick up a majority of them here, that's shown in yellow. And then the other parking lots, they'll be sporadic, a couple here and a couple there. So really, that's part of what they need. My understanding is you could use more, but at this time, they're trying to get at least 40 of them to at least trying to keep some of the people from off the driveways and whatnot. So we're trying to find 40 locations for stalls at this time for them, and that's kind of what we're here for, is to try and get approval, at least go ahead to move forward with developing some plans to take care of this. Anything else you want to add?
No, we just keep growing as a company, and parking is at a premium right now. So we're trying to find as many spots as we can within our footprint to add in some spots in it.
Do you know about how many people currently park on the streets?
On the streets, we probably have about 40 to 60 people on the streets every day. If you go out there, you can go around our building, and it's ringed on usually both sides of the street on Gaston, Landmark. And with construction going on across the street at the window corners, it's taking up some spots that we usually have, so.
Now, is this just the first phase, or are you looking at other options to gain more? Because obviously 40 is not going to be enough, because you continue to grow as an organization, which is wonderful. Are you looking at other options then beyond the 40, or is this going to pretty much max out?
This for the time being, this should hold us over. We've looked at other options as doing like a parking deck, under an over deck, but that's down the road to do that.
And probably already encouraged carpooling and some other things as well, I'm sure.
Yep, we do within the company. We credit people, fitness points for carpooling. So we encourage people to carpool. A lot of people will ride their bikes, walk if they can.
Mhm.
So it's being a fitness company. We try to encourage as much of that as we can.
Aaron, any other, or Kevin?
Yeah, certainly it's something we need over there, because it's kind of a chain reaction now when, you guys park off-site or in other parking lots, and then, it kind of affects everybody, so I think this is great to get as many, more spots in there as we can. The conditions I had, just any trees or major landscaping elements that are going away to accommodate the parking, just replace them somewhere else in the green space. And just run a landscaping plan by staff to sign off on that. Likewise, any engineering drawings that MSA needs, probably grading, stormwater primarily.
Yeah, just as to which features features they drain to, I think, was the main thing. Currently, that maybe there's enough existing, but obviously you're adding impervious area to the site and everything, so.
Right, there may be some adjustments or a new field inlet out there, new curb locations to tie in, and probably do some sort of analysis to see what the existing facility can hold as far as infiltration, if we gotta make modifications to what they already have out there.
Yeah.
I think we'd want to see some details on some of those curbs, like the data points and stuff like that.
There's a few that are getting pretty tight, and whether they need the lengths or different things.
Sure, they just
trying
haven't
to
been
get
fully
everything-
thought through yet, so.
Yeah, we'll provide detailed plans of all the stalls, spot grades, how the drainage is gonna work. That's in the works right now.
Perfect.
Any questions from the commission?
Motion to approve the request from Johnson Health Tech
With conditions?
with conditions.
Thank you.
Second.
We got a motion second for approval with conditions as spelled out by staff. No more detail obviously coming, and certainly the runoff. Any other discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, then moving on to item 8, discuss and consider the final plat for Kennedy Hill subdivision located in the town of Cottage Grove within the village of Cottage Grove's extraterritorial jurisdiction. Yes.
Evening. My name is Dave Reesup. I'm owner, developer, surveyor, I guess, on the project. This is the first phase of what I have planned there. It's on the corner of BB and Kennedy Road. It'll be 16 lots. We had reviewed it last year, and in the meantime, we were working on the stormwater plans. We'd like to get going in the spring now.
And then memo on, you want
Yeah, so as Dave said, we looked at this, and I believe it was last July, the preliminary plat was approved. So it falls within the window that he had to provide the final plat. By statute, if the final plat is substantially similar to the preliminary plat, we would have to approve it. There are some differences, but I think generally it's pretty similar. I think
Yeah,
like the
generally-
stormwater pond got bigger. That's probably the biggest.
Yeah, I got about twice as big as I thought I was gonna.
But otherwise, the network is more or less the same. The curve of the streets may be a little different. But I would say similar enough that I'm not concerned about those changes. Just a couple of things we asked for in the ordinance that we would need to see yet. Are you gonna have streetlights?
No, no one asked for them. The town wasn't interested in them.
Okay. If you did, we'd want to see where they're going, but if you're not, that's fine. Are you gonna have covenants or?
Yeah, we're just finishing them up, developers agreement and owners association.
If you want to send a copy of those over when you're done drafting them up. And then just kind of a note that the village will authorize lot sizes less than an acre, as long as that's also approved by the town board, which the town has looked at this, and they're obviously okay with the lot sizes.
Yeah, well, there'll be septic and wells, so we need a little more room there.
So we recommend approval with those conditions.
I move approval for final plat for Kennedy Hill subdivision located in the town of Cottage Grove within the village of Cottage Grove with conditions as set forth by staff.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion second. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I was so the town board has approved this then?
Not quite yet. The meetings will be the end of the month, but one of their conditions was that you approve it, so since you're extraterritorial, you come first, I guess.
Okay. And then, and Dane County has approved it?
Yeah, they approved it last year with conditions of you approving it and the stormwater approval and county highway, several
to do the conservation easements yet?
Yeah, those are, I have an offer to purchase those, and those will be, signed the end of the month, I believe. So, I don't wanna get them too far in advance, so they're not inexpensive, so.
And so is that part of, do you need those before the town approves? Is that part of the condition?
I need those before the town signs the final plat, so.
Okay.
Should be forthcoming.
And when you said you have an offer, did you mean you have an option that you can exercise for those? You have the legal right to exercise those
Yeah,
TDR?
sign agreement.
Yeah.
And it's been reviewed by Dane County, and they're satisfied, so I just have to finish it and hand over the money, so.
Okay.
Any other discussion? We have a motion second, then, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 9 is then discussing request from Tim Olson to amend the Village of Cottage Grove Comprehensive Plan to change parcel 0711-174-8500-3 and 0711-174-9002-4, totaling 72 acres from future development area to planned neighborhood. And again, this is for information only. It's no action required this evening of the commission.
Hi.
Hello.
So recall last time Tim was here, we just kind of generally looked at the area, and Tim was asking to add the parcels to the west to the comp plan, so the whole chunk of land there could be designed and coordinated together. Tim and I have sat down multiple times between then and now and kind of sketched different ideas out, and what you have up there is kind of the concept as it sits right now. The black lines obviously would be the road network going through. The darker green would be a kind of active park area. The lighter green would be green space, possibly with trails in it. There's woods and drumlins in there that are really developable, wetlands also. The lighter beige would be a larger lot, up a little bit to the north there in the middle. There's the existing house there now, and maybe another couple of larger lot, single family. The yellow would be kind of our typical SR4, 10,000 square foot minimum. Residential, the orange would be the SR6 that we just created, the higher density single family, and then the darker orange would be a multifamily or possibly senior type units, I think is what Tim was kind of thinking. So
Yeah, that's Phyllis right there. That's the park. That's, but anyways, that's the parking lot across Phyllis. That's, where the rugby fields are. Here's where the soccer fields are. And then we're right across the street from that. And then we go all the way down to Coffee Town and come back up. But it kind of lends itself to, like, there's, everybody's got to go to play soccer. Well, we put some more soccer fields over here, that could probably help a lot of that. Get more of a central park feeling. That's kind of what we're after.
we'd work with the Parks Department, obviously, on, I guess, whether they want to park there, and then what ideally it would get used for.
Yeah, we're very flexible in what can happen, but it kind of looks good. You have to get through all the way back and make the loop, and that's kind of the key for what we see. But
And the bike trail coming out of the park would still be a component of this as well.
Yeah, that's right here.
Were you asking a question?
Sure.
Oh, okay. One thing that comes up with a lot of these roads in the back areas like this is, can the road handle the added traffic? So it's really for MSA. I mean, it's, do we have to, is that road, Violet, gonna have to be widened? Is that designed for the density that we're looking for, those types of things? Bus routes, you're gonna add traffic.
Yeah.
So is there improvements that we have to consider when we go to the next update of the comp plan, or whatever it is that you're looking for, beyond just,
Yeah, that's
new
kind of the
stuff.
next level.
Okay.
If you guys are kind of okay with this sort of layout and density, then that's probably the next step to look
Okay.
at any public improvements that would have to be associated with it.
That came up before, Alex.
Okay.
On Vilas, and I thought the way it's sat now, it could handle, I mean, we were way underutilizing the capacity of Vilas right now.
I remember
Yeah.
in general, as currently constructed, I mean, there may be more urban-based improvements that the village may want, you know, so I don't want to speak to improvements that MSA might want to add in here, but I seem to remember the traffic could account for 10,000 cars a day as currently constructed on Vilas, and right now there's around 2,000.
Yeah.
So this would add, it would be pretty negligible in the grand scheme of things. Once it gets above 10,000 cars a day, then you have to consider 4-lane or additional turn lanes and things like that.
Does it also, I mean, with your review, you know, does that also review the speed limits and those types of things come up? Is that
Absolutely.
part of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know that road can be fast, so, and I see a lot of bicycles on that road as well sometimes, so it's a well-used road, it's a good artery to maintain.
And there's a town landowner further west, and if you want to point to that, Tim, where they're kind of looking at development, a town subdivision potentially. So the town might have a role in any improvements to Coffee Town also, if they're gonna.
They have a receiving area there.
We still have it as rural in our comp plan, so it's something we'd have to kind of work out if we were gonna
Yep.
allow that or not, but it might be contingent on them helping out with, you know, some of the road improvements.
So you had come here last year, was it, with a different plan for that area that now is all nature preserve, or nature area? I can't read it. I need glasses. So was it just too foresty or something to do houses in?
Well,
there?
it just kind of fits to, if you go into what a planned unit development is what fits there. And then, you know, because then you can maintain all of that ridge and those pine trees and the personality of that land, which is, you know, it's quite nice. I don't know how familiar you are, but it's, and it would be, you know, it would be a very nice neighborhood, you know, and it can line right up with the park, which is, I think, very important, because the park has been here forever. And, you know, that's Central Park. That's, you know, that's the center of everything. We get a little bit more land there and this and that, and it just seems to make sense. I mean,
Okay.
It sounds like the way you've been talking, the developers you're talking to kind of need these extra units to the west to financially make the whole thing work.
yeah,
most
you know,
likely.
and it all has to go together like that, but then you maintain the integrity of that land, and which is, you know, that's a big part of all of that area.
Selling point too, to live there then, close to all that.
Oh my gosh, yes.
This also avoids, I think the earlier plan was we were gonna have multiple driveways going onto Vilas.
Right.
So that avoids, that dilemma as well. You know, just a couple roads instead of multiple driveways with this plan.
Yeah, yep.
Much better. And then the other piece of this is you avoid having to have a turnaround for fire trucks or whatever and trying to accommodate that with a bullnose or something of that sort. Because this is just rolled through with multiple roads in and out. Makes a lot more sense.
So mostly just looking for feedback, and if everyone's okay with this, we'll just keep moving forward.
Yeah, it looks good to me. I don't know.
Yeah. Keep her moving.
Well, now, it's only 31 years, Doug.
You're getting closer.
God dang it.
Any other comments from the commission? All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Next item is item 10. It's an update on Monona Grove School District Elementary School Project. No action required on this. Aaron sent through to the commission a memo, actually two memos. One he put together in response to the school district's memo. It seems we've moved away from the initial agreement that this board, commission, and the board approved as far as annexing of this this development, which is unfortunate because now we have problems with Bus Road and what that looks like. So the engineering folks have been working on the alternatives, ultimately looking at, you know, is this safe for the kiddos to get to that school? So this is just open information only. Hopefully we can get to some sort of agreement fairly quickly, because before you know it, we're going to need to break ground on this for them to meet all their deadlines.
So you're gonna go slow the way we had an agreement, but now there is no agreement?
Well,
And I know you're gonna comment and you're gonna fill in the blanks with some of the conversation back and forth?
so the agreement was
We had,
the annexation
right,
of the property, and this commission, as well as the board, had conditions on that. Then you moved to the next step with actually putting together a formal developers agreement, and that's where we've been for the last several months.
I would categorize it as that there were approvals, and then staff's been working on making sure those approvals are properly laid out in an agreement. And, you know, we've had various meetings and conversations and compromises, staff v. staff. And what we're seeing here is ultimately, once we got through all of that, where the school board was at, and the school board was communicating with our board with that letter, and then Aaron put together a memo to put some context to that. So,
so we've drifted, just to summarize it, so I'm wrapped around,
Yeah.
sorry. We had approvals, staff was directed to work with staff, make it
Yep.
sync, and that did not prior to a formal approval, right, so we had these, right, prior to, right, and that never occurred, so we don't have, prior to an agreement, so we have approvals, looking for an agreement, don't have an agreement, right?
It's essentially it's a contract. It's a contract between the village and the district, which is where we're at now, trying to put that all together.
But
So
the
everything
original stipulations are not now
Some of them.
in the
Not-
contract.
And not necessarily, basically what happened is, and as you'll see from the memo that was shared, there was a difference of understanding, or at least an expressed difference of understanding as to what was approved last year. And, you know, the district made the statement that they were unaware that when the administrator said, we accept, you know, we can proceed with these conditions, they were unaware that one of the conditions was to do a full boulevard upgrade to the entire length of Bus Road along their boundary. So that's about, well, it's more than a quarter of a mile. It's a 60 acre parcel. So they were unaware of that. For whatever, regardless of why that occurred, they have not budgeted enough money to complete that required action. And, we've done some research on, they've been through this very recently on a greenfield development and for the middle school, 10 years, a little more than 10 years ago. And the total costs here are really doing all of what was required are very similar. In terms of the time value of money, that's almost exactly the same, but they had gone to referendum prior to really any formal review by the village of what would be required here. And there were some assumptions made about initial discussions being all that would be required. And so, we're trying hard to not go tit for tat on any of this, but because, there's a project that needs to move forward here, it's as far along as it is. And so, our idea was to attempt to find a temporary, less costly, but still, as Chairman said, safety first approach, even if it's going to cause some inconvenience in terms of traffic flow and things like that for a while. And that's MSA has put together. We just received that a little bit before I left to come here. And that's not to say that's what's going to happen, because that's going to be an option for the board to consider next week. And but the idea being, okay, if we don't move with the full bus road improvements today, and we delay that for 5 years, what can we live with from now until then in terms of having confidence that people will be safe?
So just to clarify, there's two parcels, right, coming off of BV. There's the first set, and then there's where the school is being built. You said, so the parcel that adjacents there, somehow, and then for clarity, I thought we were asking they do the whole thing down to BV. No.
Just there.
Last year we only asked for that section that they had. Okay.
And in fact,
And the traffic light, I think, too, was that part of? So
Yeah,
it was an
their
improvement to
portion
the
of that.
intersection of BB and Bus, and then just their section would be Boulevard style, both sides.
well, the whole road will eventually be Boulevard 7. They just wouldn't be responsible for more than their share of the intersection and the bus road segment that's along their boundary.
Right, their boundary section, right.
So there's some things that have been done in this, in really all of the conditions remain. All of the conditions remain. There's some timing allowances that have been discussed, both with respect to some of the road connections in the northeast part of the property, some of the public utility infrastructure in that area, which is really very good, because where that road goes may very well depend on what happens to the north and what they decide to do with that northeast part of that property. And then, there isn't a condition that I'm aware of that's been eliminated. It's just about timing.
Because this to me is just a tactic on their end. I specifically remember, Matt, when there was 2, if not 3 school board representatives sitting right there. They stood there, they sat there silently, not acknowledging or saying a word. And Matt specifically called out those conditions of the road connections to the northeast, the bus road, and whatnot. So for them to say it was a surprise is bunk. They knew full well, Matt indicated in meetings with them separately that they would never acknowledge or want to talk about. They would just be mute, completely mute on these. So this, in my mind, is a tactic that they're using to try to weasel their way out of conditions that were set forth. And the fact that their engineer didn't plan for this or budget for this isn't really our problem. I know we need to work with them, but I think this is basically a tactic. And just like Aaron wrote in his memo, this timeline is their point of view. You know, they're basing some of their knowledge or some of their points on an article in the Herald Independent, you know, as fact. And, some of their other points here, I don't agree with. It's not my take on what happened in this room in our discussions.
Your take on that is very consistent with what we've heard from most everyone else who was involved in this. I can say that as far as whether or not this is something they're trying to do to get out of it, they will end up spending more money if the village is able to come up with something it's comfortable with to allow them to delay some of these costs because some of what they do in the short term is going to be wasted, really. It won't be, certainly won't be at the end of its useful life, and it'll have to be eliminated. So, you know, I think there's some proof there as to not the timeline, not whose fault it was, not whether it was reasonable, but that they find themselves in a financial sticky spot, because otherwise it just really wouldn't make much sense for them to incur additional cost for the sake of delaying the lion's share of the cost.
Your narrative on Bus Road, can you do the same for that connecting road on the east side that's supposed to connect those Pheasant Run, Morning Dove, Red Hawk? Is that, are they delaying that now? Is that?
No, that was always going to be in
When-
line with the development that Hamburg's doing anyway.
But you,
But we're,
They've gone back and forth on that, so we've had, at various stages, we've had, what we felt were compromises that basically we thought we could have an agreement, provided the school board would agree to it. Is that a fair characterization? We had a compromise for the Andrew Hamburg 4th edition roads to head north, where they had several options to meet that. They could sell that to Hamburg or the village and do a CSM, and then their property is completely separate from those roads. That's an option. They could put the roads in and develop them themselves and make money on it to help pay for other improvements. And ultimately, we kind of left it as you know, at a time where, when Hamburg begins the plat for 6th edition, that would be the time that they would need to extend those roads north. But initially, that was the big hang-up, from our understanding, was that they were not in favor of extending the 4th edition roads. And we had come to a compromise on Bus Road that they would do the Bus Road improvements up to approximately Lane Street, and then the remainder of the school's property that they're not developing, that's an open field, could wait until Hamburg or other development triggers it going north, and then they would finish that. So we thought we had, but now we get, you know, we got this letter and it's the complete opposite. They're fine with the 4th edition roads, but it's the Bus Road that we're not okay with.
Yeah, and I think the reason why you see that in these circumstances is because you have staff working diligently to try to move forward with, we always do this, with what we expect to be within the bounds of what our bosses will say, our governing bodies. And when you have a public body like the village or the school district, and you really don't find out whether or not you hit the mark until you go in front of them and find out. And I think that that's what happened here with respect to some of these things shifting. You know, there were board members who were very adamantly, district board members who were adamantly upset about having to complete the Pheasant Run and other roads,
I can tell you who it was.
because they said, we don't have that doesn't benefit our project. And I don't disagree with them. I mean, those roads aren't to serve that project, but it's part of how we develop. I mean, by choosing that site, we altered the village's plan to run those roads through to bus. And so we have to come up with an alternative, and the alternative was connect them together and run them up. And so to say that there's not a benefit to the district there is not inaccurate. And that was just something a few people had trouble wrapping their heads around, why they'd be required to do it. Frankly, I don't think their board does a lot of greenfield development, and they've probably had a lot of turnover since the last school was built. And we do it all the time. The Village of Cottage Grove does development all the time. And so I think there's a learning curve there for them as to what's typically required in these situations.
Four of those board members sat on that board when the Glacial Dome was built. There's no excuse for this. There's no excuse for it.
when it came to that connecting road, I mean, I remember we were in the presentation, like, you talking about, the engineer was under direction not to draw that in. Because I remember we went through the presentation, and I made the comment, why did you not detail that? Even just show a line. And I said, well, I'm like, you put enough time into detail to where the trees go. and you don't know where, you don't even know what tree you're gonna put in. I said, and I even meant that
We
was
probably knew
me.
the tree they're gonna put in.
You know, you detailed the trees, but you couldn't draw a line that these roads are gonna connect, and we're telling you this has to occur, because exactly what you said, you chose to buy that property.
And I don't think he said anything. I think he was directed to say nothing about that.
Yeah.
He said
They-
nothing.
Yep.
So,
They put themselves into this. Yeah. Unfortunately, I know we're all gonna.
Well, I mean, the bottom line, it looks to me, is they requested 10% of what it's actually gonna cost.
Yeah.
And there's no effort at this point by the village to, you know, somehow meet a dollar target that they've laid out in their memo. The effort by the village right now is to design what would be an acceptable temporary set of improvements to that corridor so that it satisfies, you know, not the long-term expectations, but safety and functionality for the short term. So that option might be $1 million, it might be $500,000, it might be 150. That's not part of the analysis. It's what's safe, and you know, that's information they're providing. I take that. I would just recommend you all take that as information that sort of explains the situation they find themselves in, and leave the rest of it aside as best you can.
Reading it. But that's, I've lived here 20 years, that's typical of how they operate. So I'm paying, as a citizen, I'm paying for it one way or another.
Well, at least we share the cost with Monona if the school.
Well,
school
Economy of
district
scale.
pays
I should,
for
should
it.
add,
Monona kicking in.
I should add to that, Fred, I think what's important too is you'd be disproportionately paying for it
Yeah.
if
That's right.
the village ends up being stuck with anything, which is why
Right,
we
that's
can't.
what I'm.
Correct, because it's a school district with other jurisdictions involved, and it's a district, and everyone needs to pay that equal share, or, you know, proportional share.
Put their dime
I mean, ultimately, in the agreement, the district has to agree that that has to be done per what was laid out in the conditions originally.
Where it comes back. So process-wise, if they're not even close to the conditions, it's gotta come back to planning, right? You're gonna wind the whole timescale back.
We'd have to look at that. At this point, we're not even talking about options that aren't what was approved. It's just about timing. And so you end up, you know, if there's and it's not that unusual, usually for practical, functional reasons that you end up with a temporary solution, whether it's, you know, depending on what's going to happen, like dead-ending roads at the end of your subdivision, right?
we know what happens with that.
Well, that's why I smile, but yeah, so as far as, I actually had a conversation with the district's attorney today, and I don't think we have really any hang-ups on the agreement, other than, you know, there's just a few wording details we're working on for what we will recommend to the board for approval. Again, the board gets to decide if we hit the mark or not, right? And not me in a position where I don't know the board well, maybe we missed it by a long mark, we'll see, but I don't see any conditions that aren't included. And it'll be, you know, a relatively short period of time before all of them are not just recognized, but actually constructed, so.
Let me try to make it clear too that we'll be as reasonable and flexible as we can within the parameters of how and when something gets done, but not if. And that's kind of been the key, so.
Yeah, and I mean, even, I think the district has received good counsel, because, you know, I've seen the communications that they've had internally, and, you know, he's describing to them the special assessment process. So it's very clear that even if we said, whatever, don't do anything on the road, we could turn around next year and specially assess them and build, and fully build it out. And they recognize that, so it shows me that, again, however we got here, they don't have the money to do it. And they're stuck in a tough spot because of it.
And ultimately, we need to defer to engineering and safety, because if a temporary or alternative solution in any way compromises that, we can't go with it. And I'm a little concerned that they didn't want to put a path along Bus Road for kids to get down to the school in their
Are they
alternative.
also deferring the connection between On the Blair property, wasn't that part of part of the cost, or no? Because that's the one key thing, right? So you got the village and all the residences, and right now you have to go all the way around if that connection is not done on that.
Well, that was part of what they submitted and we approved, so.
The connection between the two school sites?
Yeah,
I
that's
think,
not.
That's something that we're including, and we've got to talk about the
That
details
can't
still
be
after
deferred.
this meeting, but that's something we're
No, because the
including.
flow of the buses need to go that way.
At least for whatever they do with their driveway and maintenance access, at least for ped and walking,
Yeah.
they've got to be able to come through from the east side. And then just to talk about sort of the basics of what this compromise option, again, we're going to share it with the district so we have their feedback for Monday night for the board, because everyone's sort of on a short time scale here, but we're being very clear to them that this is just a staff idea, and we have not taken it to our board yet. We'd like their feedback, but the basics of that are turn lanes in from the south and from the north on bus, no left turn into the second driveway off of bus, so that you don't have to have another turn lane. Bike ped path all the way from bus, from BB up to and past their driveway to Lane Street with a landing, sort of waiting pad on the other side of Lane Street. An improved crosswalk at Lane Street so that there's at least some button to push for flashing lights or something, which we'd probably be considering anyway, even if they were doing the full boulevard development. And then, and to be clear, the bike trail portion from BB up to the school district's property will be the village's portion to do, as we would do the bus road, as we were planning to do the bus road improvements along that Blair property. And then lastly, connection off the east side of the property into the Pheasant Run area and or Glacial Drumlin, so that there's foot and bike access from multiple directions that are safe.
And just to add, there's a lot to coordinate, because Shady Grove, Andrew Homburg, and the county are also participating in the intersection improvements and then certain BB improvements. So there's a lot of, everyone's paying their fair share.
So to be clear, the district has not asked for any special concession on their portion of the intersection improvements at Bus and Cottage Grove.
Yeah.
We're just talking about the actual improvements to the road itself along the edge of their property.
The most expensive part of what's left.
Makes me wonder what else they didn't budget for.
That's not our,
Well, they did such a good job at Glacial Drumlin, what are you talking about?
all right, any other discussion from staff or comments or questions from the commission? Again, this was to keep the commission up to speed on what's going on. The village board next Monday will be taking a lot of this into council and looking at what we have from engineering at that point. I know engineering and Aaron have been working diligently to try to put this back together. We just got this memo, a week ago or less? So it's been a scramble, but so I certainly appreciate their efforts to trying to sort through all this and come up with something that's ultimately going to hopefully work. And again, as has been said, more than likely we'll be ripping stuff out in order to bring it up to where it was originally agreed to, but that's the case, that's the case. Assuming it's safe. All right. Item 11 then is discuss potential amendments to the zoning ordinance related to conditional use permits. Again, this is no formal action at this time. So Aaron, you've got a memo?
So there's two pieces to this. One is a table that lists basically every land use in every district and whether it's permitted or conditional. So the red Cs are the conditional uses, and those are kind of the ones we're focused on, how we want to treat those going forward. As you recall, Larry and I kind of explained this last time with the changes to the state statutes. We're kind of in a position where we have to approve a conditional use if they meet the conditions that we list in our ordinance, so. We want to go back through all of those uses and see, do we want to keep them as conditional uses? And if so, we want to make sure we have, some airtight conditions that we can put on them, or we can create overlay districts, which are not treated the same way for the statute. There could be some of these where we're actually just okay with them and we want to just make them permitted in certain districts, or there may be some we just don't want to allow at all. So the table kind of listed out where those conditional uses are, and then the remainder of the staff report kind of goes through them one by one and makes at least an initial recommendation about how it could be treated. I guess it's up to you guys if we want to go through them one by one, or if you just want to pick out some that you maybe had thoughts on or had other ideas how we should handle them.
I'd add to that by doing the sort of initial recommendations that Aaron did, it gives a good set of examples of the types of tools we might use. So as you work through this, he really came up with a lot of different ideas for tools to replace conditional uses. And I guess I would point out, when you look at the second document that he sent, when it was, I printed it not in color, but when it was in color, or if you can tell the difference between a P and a C, all the C's are conditional uses, and so there's really a lot of conditional uses. And
So the overall goal then, Aaron, is really to reduce the number of conditional uses and handle this really through zoning, ultimately. So
Reduce them or make sure we know what we're getting for the ones that we
are going to
impose
have.
appropriate conditions.
Measurable conditions.
And understand that in those districts, if somebody proposes one of those, they're probably gonna end up there.
Yeah.
It can't be our dumping ground for the things we don't wanna tell people no for ahead of time, which is what a lot of conditional uses have been in various communities. We've gotta be.
And I'm assuming we're leveraging where others have blazed a trail here, the few that are working on this, or are we kind of?
So that was another question that you all asked of us at the last meeting, and I've done a lot of asking, and there's a few places that I'm aware of where they've taken some things that they really don't want in their community, and they've just dealt with those piecemeal. That's not a permanent solution for anyone, because even if you're not worried about, close your eyes and touch your page, that particular conditional use permit in that zone, we really don't know how to do what this body should do under the existing ordinance, because it doesn't comport with what's in the statute. And so, it's not just if you fear that particular use. We have to know how to function too. And that really, to do that, we've got to set up it doesn't have to be all overnight, but we've got to really set up a set of conditions that we can apply to each one of these that remain as a conditional use. Eventually.
Is this something we want to look at this better and then maybe work on a meeting if we don't have long meetings, or?
I think so.
So the ones that maybe Aaron suggests keeping as conditional use, like a bed and breakfast, then we would come back and have to figure out the conditions that would go with it.
Right.
Is that?
Rather than just saying, based on public health, safety, and welfare, we're going to come up with our list and tell you what they are, we would say, we're going to impose conditions on the number of guests. Maybe the number of, if not guests, the number of total nights, those types of things. It'll take some creativity to figure out exactly what we might be concerned with in a particular use that we haven't seen. And I was thinking about it in the context of the auto shop that was here in front of this board now twice.
recently or in front of the village twice, so that you think, well, okay, where are we okay with that type of use? And what would we condition it? Parking, outdoor, vehicles stored outdoors, unlicensed vehicles, so that's the kind of exercise we're gonna have to go through with each of these that you want to keep in conditional use. In some cases, it'll be easier to say, well, that's not allowable use in this zone, and if someone wants to do that, they have to come and get a zoning change, as John said, and so this body loses some of the control in that regard, but overall, as a village, you maintain your prerogative.
And then it's a bit of an educational process when you get the inevitable public comments of, I just don't like, they don't want the project, but that's not what this body is evaluating. It's
Not in my
evaluating.
backyard.
Yeah, so it sometimes can put everyone in a tough spot, because the approval isn't do the project or not do the project, it's,
What does the project look
it's
like?
discuss the conditions,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, so you'll see a lot of that, even as we haven't changed this, if there's testimony about preferences, I will probably step in and say, it's good to know what people prefer, but just as a reminder to the body, so that none of you start saying, well, I don't think we should do this because the neighbors don't prefer, and so we have to make sure we don't even use those words. And so I'll be reminding everyone along the way.
I think we did pretty good with the daycare.
In not saying what you were.
That's not our job to, does it meet,
They're all still open too, aren't they?
Yeah.
they are,
They were
although
all
it did get
closed.
sold.
Yeah.
Rainbow.
So Aaron, what would you suggest the commission, how we tackle this? Because
Maybe in the interest of keeping it moving forward, the ones that I recommended staying as conditional uses, I can start drafting up those criteria, and if you guys want to go through the list in more detail, you can always email me your comments or whatever before the next meeting.
yeah, ultimately, we want to keep this progressing, because we want to make sure that we get this in place sooner rather than later, and certainly give Aaron what he needs to keep moving forward as well.
I think as a parallel to that, I would want to know if there's anything that people are really worried about. Because I think we can do a zoning code change to just pull those out and set them aside, at least until we get back to them. So that would be something, probably an assignment for everyone on the commission to review and say.
So a moratorium?
Well, we would just make it a prohibited use, at least temporarily in the zones where we're concerned about that. We wouldn't even have to do a moratorium.
On a quick look, there was like mobile home was allowed in one of the districts, and I guess I would just mix that all together.
So there are things like that, like migrant camp. I would have to look at the statutes to see if you're required to allow that somewhere.
Okay.
The sexually oriented land uses is another one. I think most municipalities would just say we don't want them, but gets into freedom of speech issues that you have to allow them to some extent. So there's some kind of statutory research that would have to be done for some of these things.
And when you say an overlay, what do you mean by that?
So for instance, with mobile homes, for instance, basically, the overlay isn't a formal term. What we're talking about is designing a zone, another zone, like mobile home zone, if you will, and not having anything in the village designated as being subject to that designation at this time. So if someone wanted to do that, they'd come in and say, well, I'm rural holding or whatever I am, I want to change my zoning to mobile home. And that is a legislative decision. Again, while the village can choose to run some of those analyses through this body, it would be a decision ultimately for the legislative body, which is the village board. But the rules we're trying to thread a needle here around some rules that those rules don't apply to that legislative decision. So we can just say, we don't want it.
It's a zoning district that sits aside that someone can apply for, but the plan commission and board aren't obligated to approve it.
Or you could just completely get rid of it and say it's not allowed anywhere, and then someone would come in and say, well, I wanna do this here, and it's still a zoning code change. Changing someone's zoning from commercial to residential is a zoning code change, just like creating a brand new zone for someone who comes with a use that's not permitted would be, so all of it, those things that you're really the most concerned about, you put into the zoning code change category, whether that be an overlay district, just making it a prohibited use that someone would have to come in and argue, could be, you know, make a new zone for me, whatever, as long as it's a zoning code change.
Okay.
Often used with quarries.
What about airport?
Airports often used with airports.
No one's putting an airport in the village. It's
Unless we annex it.
another one. Well, the county wouldn't allow.
So everybody's is that okay? Everybody is gonna look at the list and say, these things worry me, and then we can see if there's a more expedient temporary.
Thought form.
If you wanna send comments. Take the bus road approach to them, we'll take a temporary solution. If you wanna send comments, send them to me, don't send them to each other, because that's.
Yep.
Constitutes a meeting.
Great, thanks for doing this, Aaron.
So,
Looked like a lot of work.
I didn't quite finish, there really isn't anybody that I'm sure there's so many communities, but I'm really not aware of others that are doing this now. Everyone is going to have to, so.
We're usually on the cutting edge.
This will be the kind of thing I told Aaron when he's done with this.
Did we budget?
He's gonna be giving a talk at the planners conference, because everybody's gonna be wondering how best to do this.
All right, putting us on the map.
Case study.
Yeah, on the map.
Right
So
after the splash
what
pad.
prompted all this initially, Larry, or just?
This is just an enactment under state law.
State
That-
did it.
And if you remember from the last time, it was over a sand mine, and
Oh, yeah.
they agreed to all the conditions, and they still denied it. And the Supreme Court said that was okay. So then they changed the statute.
Okay.
all right, everybody's got their homework. Item 12 then is discuss and consider holding the next meeting on April 15th instead of our regular scheduled meeting on April 8th.
So, all
Um,
right.
April 8th is Passover. My wife is Jewish. It's kind of a big deal in her family. I was gonna go down to Chicago if I can. If we can't move it, then I'll be here. That's fine too. But the next board meeting that month is on the 20th, so if we do move it to the 15th, it's not holding anything up. So I thought I would at least ask the question.
Well, could we do it before sundown? This isn't Passover at sundown.
They're in Chicago.
He's not sure.
Oh, sorry.
Move the heliport, he's not.
Unless you did it on April Fool's Day, right?
The way it's scheduled right now, we're scheduled to do the board meeting and the planning commission on the same week.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was a question. It didn't sound like it.
So instead, we're gonna.
Just because of the way that the month lays out.
Usually the first one.
It's first Monday, yes.
So I'm gonna go.
So this actually spaces things out better.
It does, because it's the second Wednesday and
This is actually the third Wednesday. First Wednesday is the first.
this is, the 8th is the second Wednesday. That's why
Okay,
it's,
yeah.
that's why it's
Right, right.
kind of goofy.
So you guys do what you need to, I will not be a village resident on the 15th.
Is that a problem?
I don't think. It's because of this, no. We started to close on the 10th.
Okay.
It happened very fast.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you wanna pay for that road, huh?
Right.
Or is that a different issue?
Jeez.
Well,
So about that
Yeah.
mobile park, with that trailer.
Do we have at least 4?
Yeah, I'm good.
What?
Good.
What? We're
The
moving it?
15th, is that okay?
I'll try to be here. Depends on
we
how
are
much I gotta pay
currently
in taxes.
homeless, so maybe we'll rent an apartment.
I always
Cut it
pay.
short.
I always pay.
You don't see that.
Just let me know.
You won't be here if it's bad.
The 15th work for you too?
Yes,
It's
works for me, Alex. You good?
more than Friday.
So we
I
should
have
have
another
four.
thing that night.
Or anywhere in the country.
Well, so the only other Wednesday is April
Finishing your
1st.
taxes.
The
the Wednesday before, but it's only 3 weeks
That
away.
too.
You
Yeah.
wanna be ready for that?
I don't think so. Melissa, is that okay or no?
If it works for everybody else, we'll see if I can make it.
Thank you.
But Passover ends then, right? By
We
the
just go for the first night.
15th.
All right, then,
We may have our own plague by then to worry about.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, you're going to Chicago? That's a month away, so hopefully it'll be okay. Because then,
He's gonna have to self-quarantine.
right, and then you won't be able to make the meeting then either, so.
Well, the village is gonna not allow you to travel.
future agenda items, Aaron or Matt, anything that you're aware of that
Or
we,
zoning.
certainly, yes.
One or both of the hotels could be back, they're both working away. More with the conditional uses. It's more with Tim Olson's thing, keep that moving.
Okay.
I'm sure
There'll be
other
other
stuff too.
Hopefully we get that sorted, because they better, yeah. Anybody else have anything else agenda-wise? All right, otherwise, favorite time of night.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, motion second. Non-debatable, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.